The Gates Foundation has committed some $350 million coronavirus to low and middle income countries around the world. And Bill Gates joins me now from Seattle. Mr. Gates, welcome to Meet the Press, sir.
Thank you.
We're not even sure how good the vaccines are going to be and how long it will take. What is a realistic timeline here?
Well, I think it's likely that where we really will be asking Americans to, step forward.
Here in the United States, really, it's going to be Black people who really should get it first, and many Indigenous people, as well as people with underlying symptoms, and then elderly people. They're the ones who all deserve to get that vaccine first.
The effectiveness could range, could be as low as 50% or as high as 80 or 90%. And different of the vaccines, some will fail completely and others will hit a very high bar, but we don't know yet.
Some will fail completely and others will hit a very high bar, but we don't know yet.
Let me ask you this way, though. Why is there so much optimism that we're going to get this, that there is going to be a working vaccine of somewhere between 50 and 80% protection?
A few of those, like one that uses a measles vector, those are the most likely to be single shot.
Measles are way more infectious than COVID-19 is. I mean, for every person who gets measles, they tend to infect 8 to 9 other people. It is so infectious. We can have another one of those come along. So I'm hopeful that, as the vaccine comes and people do start to use it, it will quell down some of these kind of silly conspiracy theories that are out there.
We can have another one of those come along. So I'm hopeful that, as the vaccine comes and people do start to use it, it will quell down some of these kind of silly conspiracy theories that are out.
But most likely, almost all the vaccines will require the 2 shots.
Sometimes I wonder what's going to be the bigger challenge, the actual distribution of the vaccine or the public relations campaign?
Yes, the skepticism is higher than ever. People will say that it's going well, and so the attitudes. I do think the logistics will be tough. The same way we have drive-through testing now, we ought to be able to create drive-through for the vaccination as well.
Tell me how you go into a community that's skeptical of just medicine in general and end up convincing them to take a vaccine.
Who do people trust? So in Nigeria, we worked very closely with the Muslim leaders because households, saw those leaders giving, and this is the polio vaccine that there were bad rumors about. They saw those leaders giving it to their children and no ill effects there, and we were able to get rid of wild polio throughout all of Africa. That required way over 90% of the kids to take actually what is a 3-dose regimen there. But we had to put a lot of money behind it and figure out who would be trusted. And in some cases, if there were refusals, go and follow up to try and
help
raise that dosage rate.
Your role in the foundation, your role in
warning the world,
if you will, about your concern 5 years ago when it came to, frankly, that the world wasn't ready for a pandemic like this. You've been thrown into the conspiracy theory world. What have you tried to do to combat this?
Yeah, I think both Dr. Fauci and I, there's, really malign intent.
If there's one message that I want to leave with you today, based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak.
And, that is the truth.
Have you, where I want to go here with this is here you are, one of the sort of the founders, if you will, of modern technology for all of us, okay? And you helped create one of the companies that's the pillars of technology around the world. And yet in some ways, it's social media in particular, which I know in some ways you in some way were not involved in the rise of social media. But this puzzle, social media has turned out to be a weapon that's being used against you, a weapon that gets used against us in the press. What can we do about this?
Yeah, it is a problem. And more difficult is what are the answers? Because a little bit it's preying on a human weakness that these kind of wild, people can just get in to almost spread very, very quickly and get a very us versus them where they're not, and we're very polarized. I think something needs to be done, but the suggestions of how you preserve the flexibility, some level of free speech,
right,
and the benefits of these systems while knocking down the fact that.
I want to say it again, we in the World Health Organization do not advocate lockdowns as a primary means of control of this virus. The only time we believe a lockdown is justified is to buy you time to reorganize, regroup, rebalance your resources, protect your health workers who are exhausted. But by and large, we'd rather not do it.
That is a big problem.
Did you ever expect that what was supposed to democratize information and democratize access ended up fueling what we're seeing today? I mean, I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure what good comes out of the media right now.
I'll stick up for it a tiny bit.
I ask you a very simple, direct question that's so easy to answer, and you sit here and you spin and you lie to my face.
How do you slow them down? How much of a burden should there be on the companies?
To counterweight, if not flood the zone?
I personally do not believe that trying to shut things down in terms of information is either practical or desirable. And we do have, I think, a couple of strategies that are available to us, one of which is the flood strategy.
How do you get communities of people working together to try and
minimize?
Well, I'm someone who believes that what the government had relative to the phone companies, where they could look into, sex rings or organized crime. Going through a court approval process for wiretapping, that equivalent needs to be maintained for the government with good safeguards. That's even considered controversial that law enforcement, maybe they should go blind for a lot of these things. I don't know that particular case, but I do think wiretapping net has been very beneficial.
Sex rings or organized crime, going through a court approval process for wiretapping, that equivalent needs to be maintained for the government with good safeguards.
China.
Well, we have a lot of common interests, advancing the pandemic, reducing the negative effects of climate change and getting rid of those emissions.
Nature is angry.
There, should be things that are things that can be tackled together. So it's not completely zero sum. And that's a bit dangerous. You could even get a war at some point, which I don't think would be advantageous. How do you stake out what your clear positions are? This is one of the greatest challenges. Both sides have been driving the other one apart in the last year.
Do you believe, for instance, during the whole TikTok back and forth, this idea that if the U.S. government wants TikTok,
the U.S. has to be careful. We often think, okay, the U.S. versus China, but the AI community is a very global community.
You could even get a war at some point.
That would be a step backwards for the innovation that we expect to participate in. So,
The original Industrial Revolution was driven by the discovery that you could use steam engines to do all kinds of interesting things.
But that was followed by additional revolutions for electricity and computers and communications technology. We're now in the early stages of the fourth industrial revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
let me ask it are we going to have two internets?
We don't want to have two internets. The Chinese do run a firewall, and so you could say in that sense, we already do.
I want to end our conversation going back to the pandemic and the overall response. Can we do a reset?
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight the real virus, but to shape the system.
Or is it too late?
We have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path.
But
It is an opportunity we have never had before and may never have again. So we must use all the levers we have at our disposal, knowing that each and every one of us has a vital role to play.
Or something, but I'm afraid to say I'm not an expert.
Now is the time to think what history would say about this crisis. And now is the time for all of us to define our own role. What is it that would make it so that history would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset?
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world.
Well, there are lots of additional deaths coming if we don't get our act together. If we reimburse for these worthless things.
You have said, your foundation said that this pandemic may have set back, we had made advances and I think you had said this pandemic basically erased 20 years of progress.
I'm driving your car!
How long before we can start making progress again? This virus, are we looking at 2022, 2023, when we feel like we'll have this virus under control around the world?
You can probably get that back in shape within 3 or 4 years.
Within 3 or 4 years.
The poverty impacts and educational impacts will be more like 10 plus years because they didn't have the ability to write lots of checks. Their jobs are not in offices at all, so they've suffered disproportionately. And this gradual progress that's usually very positive, it has, for the first time since World War II, we've had this huge setback.
And I'm curious, do you think this global sort of movement that is anti-globalism, is this something that can get reversed, or do you fear it's only going to cause more of these problems down the road?
You know, that work is not entirely in the U.S. In fact, for the ones the U.S. government has funded, a lot of the amazing work is over in Europe.
Headlines, radio, newspapers. You would almost never hear or read about anything else.
So countries working together on tough problems, including over time climate change.
Turn on the TV.
Being ready for the next pandemic. I think the value of global cooperation is quite evident. After World War II, we built a lot of institutions that meant we haven't used nuclear weapons since then.
Let's hope.
So yes, you can always have tuning on the global system, but the idea of each country for itself, that won't ever help us deal with pandemics or climate change.
The word sustainability can mislead us. You know, there's nothing that's staying the same. The world population is going to grow. Now, if we do the right things, we take care of babies in the first 30 days, we can actually have a dramatic impact on what the peak population is, about 10%. And any way you measure that, whether it's the local areas where if you don't reduce the population growth, you won't have enough land to grow the food, you won't have stability, the environment won't be maintained there. Those health investments are far more economic than any other thing you could do having to do with the energy system or anything else. So
investments in family planning.
Taking care of babies, which relative to many other costs are quite small.
Nature is angry, and we fool ourselves if we think we can fool nature, because nature always strikes back, and around the world, nature is striking back with fury. Young people who are taking to the streets to demand that we change our relationship with nature now. Let us lace up our running shoes and win the climate race for us all. Thank you.
Thank you all.